Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Haptic Feedback, a Shockoe podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. And folks, thanks so much for joining us on another episode of the show. We appreciate you listening along to some thought leadership from our industry and from our team. This is part 3 of a 3-part conversation. So if you're tuning into this episode and you didn't listen to the last 2 parts, you might be a little confused. So put a pause on this one. Go listen to those last 2 and make sure you're all caught up on our larger conversation here around product strategy and Shockoe's approach to product strategy, how that pans out into some granular actions, and how that's all in service of better communication and a more confident and quality product for the end user and a more confident process for the Shockoe team. Now, we're going to get more granular here on where part 3 rounds out the conversation. But before we do that, make sure that you're heading to our website for more content from the team and to make sure you're caught up on the last 2 episodes. So head to our website, shockoe.com. Again, SHOCKOE, shockoe.com for those episodes and for just more Shockoe content, including episodes of the podcast, articles, videos, and more. And you can also find more episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just search up Haptic Feedback, hit subscribe, and you'll find that full catalog of previous conversations, plus notifications when we drop new ones. So, like I mentioned, today is a finalization of a 3-part series on analyzing and building some actionable tips for the industry off of Shockoe's approach to strategy when developing mobile applications, platforms, or digital and mobile experiences. And the last 2 episodes focused on breaking down that definition and vision for what is product strategy in today's context, how it's reflective of today's needs and digitally transforming, or like we mentioned in episode 1, digital first industries. And then we analyzed in part 2, Shockoe's approach to product strategy, how it differs from other players in the industry, and where our listeners can apply some of those strategies to their own development or product investment team decisions. This final episode is going to try to connect the dots between all of that high-level discussion and some of the more actionable aspects of this discussion to give you a better sense for how Shockoe measures the impact of our work and the quality of a new product deployment, and why this is such a critical part of the process to guarantee not only happy customers, but a thoughtful approach from start to finish of product development. And by centering this measurable impact from start to finish, it can inform and elevate the entire process. So we're going to connect those dots for you today. And per usual, rejoined here with our conversation by the product strategy team at Shockoe. I'm pleased to re-welcome for part 3, Mr. Chandler Tyler. Chandler, how are you?
Hey, Daniel. Doing well. Thanks for having me back again.
Absolutely. Glad we could round out this conversation today. We're also joined by Mason Brown. Mason, welcome. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Great to have you back on. And finally, we're also rejoined by Toz Grewal. Toz, still living the dream.
Every single day.
Every day. It's inspiring. Now I feel like I'm living the dream too. I love the energy. All right, team. Chandler, Mason, and Toz, I appreciate y'all rejoining us to round out this conversation today. So again, we're going to be focusing our final piece of the conversation here on how do we measure strategy work and why is that important to center. So we've heard now from Shockoe that, you focus a lot on the outcomes of your product over necessarily the output itself, right? Just the fact that you check the boxes and you complete the task. Can you get a little more granular there on what that means for you in practice? Like how does Shockoe actually focus on outcomes over output along the entire process?
We want to make sure that anytime we go into the development of a new product, that we outline early on the goals that that the product should have, and a lot of times these overlap, with business goals for the product. Like that's obviously an important category of goals, but there might also be sort of goals for the customer. And operational goals, so there's a lot of different types of those. But Nonetheless, we want to define those early on, and then we want to figure out how we're actually going to measure against those goals, right? So to use an example from Mason in a prior episode, reducing call center volume is often sort of a business or operational goal that our customers have for the products that we build, right? So if an app is being developed, a consumer-facing app, the hope is that customers would use that app as opposed to picking up the phone and generating more call center volume to the support team. And so we want to make sure that we can measure something like that. And that example might be measured through certain backend systems, support systems that the client has in terms of monitoring call volume. But in other cases, we are putting analytics events into our apps to also look at what users are doing within the software that we design and build, and mapping that back to the goals that we defined early on. So, big picture, like you're saying, it's not just about saying, hey, here's our recommendations, go build the product, good luck. It's about the outcomes and the impact that we want the product to create. And so we want to go back and ensure that we are measuring the goals that we set at the beginning and have a way to sort of create ongoing reporting against those goals and make sure that we're trending in the right direction.
That's a really good point. And what comes to mind as well is a big part of what I feel like we do is also just help restate problems and restate questions and ask if we're asking the right questions. So sure, we want to reduce call center volume. The transformational application that I would like to kind of highlight there is, what are the causes of call center volume? What are the things that the software can do to mitigate those? And what are the stopgaps we can identify to make those as easy as possible through the software? So there's kind of a really consistent through line there that we want to highlight and reinforce at every step of the process.
Now, I think this is summarized well in the term impact measurement. It's really where Shockoe focuses. Its strategy, and it informs every step of the strategy. I'm curious if you see other industries, so, not just digital or web and mobile based applications and platforms or product developers in that space. Do you see other industries try to approach this impact measurement well? And have you learned from any of those other industries or drawn influence from how this is achieved elsewhere? What are your thoughts there?
Monitoring, this impact, and not just reactive, waiting around for some issue to come up or some swell of customer complaints to reach a critical mass and then come to our attention, right? So I think what Toz said is really important, that we're paying attention, and for us that means essentially we are building dashboards to track the analytics that we put in place to measure the goals, right? So it's never a one and done. We want these dashboards to be used and circulated, and ideally we have opportunities to review those with the client and make sure that everything's kind of where we expect it to be.
I think another thing to kind of build on the monitoring side is that we're very big into the concept of signals and like what are things that we should be seeing occurring that happen. And I think a good example of like where you see that also applied is in the realm of athletics and coaching, where a lot of times you're building towards a big event, whether it's like the Olympics or a big sports game, the Super Bowl, and you need signals within your team to say, are we tracking the right way? Are we completing more passes? Are we hitting certain times? Are we hitting certain thresholds? And I think that with the goal, going back to winning, like we talked about earlier, those signals are ways to kind of help us bolster our confidence. We're never going to be 100% sure of anything. Like that's just the nature of the beast. But I think that, we're constantly trying to find ways to improve our confidence. And I think that sports and then are always a good,
I'm surprised we had to wait till episode 3 to get a sports analogy from you, Mason.
Which is, but yeah, I would say like a lot of best practice, especially when you think of like leading indicators of success. I think when you boil it back to, there are things that are done in the education space. There are things that are done in the retail is a big one. You know what I mean? Where they're testing ideas in one place and expanding it out. It's very similar though, of like just looking for what are those pieces that can prove that this is working, and then we can expand on it.
Now, why do you find that this approach of centering impact measurement is particularly needed for developing web and mobile applications and tools? You know, I guess like if I had to pontificate on this a little bit, I could see that if we just look at even the last 2 years, sort of the mass acceleration of adoption of digital tools, whether they're for communication or collaboration or, improving efficiency, there was some level of energy around it. You've got to adopt this. It's time. This is a necessity. And like that pressure can, I think, maybe blind some of the slow pace of, okay, well, let me take a second. Let me really analyze the options, make sure we deploy something that has long-term value and that we can, really measure the impact around rather than just sort of check a box. Am I off base there? What are your thoughts, and how do you think that sort of connects the dots with why you see this approach really needed for the work that y'all are doing?
Yeah, I think the funny thing about when you work with enterprise is that traditionally, like, it's more using impact to kind of and there's a Melissa Perry term called escaping the build trap. She's a famous product management consultant, but I think that it's a method to help clients prioritize, like, what do we want the outcome to be, not necessarily the output. And a lot of times large companies have resources, they can build a lot of things, but then they spend a year building a lot of things and they're like, well, why isn't it working? So it's a method. As much as it's important to make work that we care about and get excited about, it's a way to help them focus on what matters for their organization, their customer, their business. And we can work with them and partner with them to figure out what the actual outputs that will realize that. And usually that ends up being a more efficient path towards getting what everyone wants, which is, reduction in call center volume or whatever the goal is. So really, trying to reduce a features overall else. But I think we also gravitate that way as just like, it's just easy to think through the world in terms of things, and behaviors can be a little more abstract. So that's where we try to help.
And scene. Love it. Now, let's, I guess, connect data into this conversation. Data-driven decision-making, that has both a buzzword quality to it, right? Everyone's talking about, got to make sure to center data and all the action you do, which, yes, I mean, I think that makes sense. It's not to invalidate that. But, I guess dig into the why more there, right? Like, why is data-driven decision-making both a buzzword, but also something that every organization is trying to maneuver and think about how to implement thoughtfully to place data at the forefront of some of these decisions? Have there been any specific trends or motivators that have pushed this to the forefront, and how do you see this intersecting with product strategy specifically?
And Toz, I want to tee you up here for a second because I want to root this. I think that the key, at least in our space, is like back to our point of like asking a lot of questions and the right questions. Really helping clients understand like what questions you can answer with data, and then in the long term starting to paint a picture of like what data we'll actually get. I think that everyone wants data driven decision making, but it's the upfront work is super critical in terms of actually being able to do that. And Toz and I were on the phone yesterday with a client talking through the decisions that he ultimately wants to make with it. And Toz, we need to talk more about it if you want.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so the first thing that comes to mind for me about data is that in and of itself, data is a series of spreadsheets. Sometimes they live on a server somewhere, and sometimes they are stored locally. But at the end of the day, it's columns, it's rows, and you can do with that really what you want. But kind of hearkening back to what was referenced, I believe, in episode 1, we know software, right? But our clients know their industries. And in a similar level, we know app analytics, but the clients know their industries. So helping kind of work backwards from what decisions do you want to make using this data helps us inform what we want to measure and how that measurement's impact can be gauged as we build those app analytics. So I think that's kind of a key part of it. The second is that data on a like granular level doesn't really mean much, right? If I were to look at retail analytics for Hasbro, toy manufacturer, from September to December every year for the past 20 years, that's kind of just spurious. You're going to get skewed data because that's the holiday season. The important thing to do is look at your totality of data and then notice overarching trends, and then decrease the width of your arc as you go along to understand how it's playing out over shorter and shorter time frames. And that's really where you start to get into key insights that can be applied long and short term from a data analysis perspective.
We just scream, what do the numbers mean, into the void.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
yeah. It's very easy to get to that place too. You can get eyeball deep in data and not really know what you're looking at. And I find that, oftentimes when we speak to someone who lives with the data on the client end, they might be in that place. So being able to come in from the outside in and offer a fresh set of eyes on that, I think that's a big value add for us as well.
And encouraging moving past a couple of vanity metrics. You know what I mean? For a certain client, our total user count could matter, but also if we're trying to get to certain things, there's probably more important signals of change that we would want to look at. So it's all also curating it to the customer and their need.
Yeah, definitely. The conversation that Mason and I had with a client yesterday, one thing that I kind of tried to underscore repeatedly while I was not only putting together this deliverable for this client, but articulating it to them, is that every bit of insight that I'm trying to tee up for you, for me, needs to be actionable. Sure, we can look at how many times a software is interacted with or how many times a button is pressed, but that needs to be contrasted with and measured against what outcome it achieves for you and what it does to build towards that outcome.
And I think in this case, it's worth mentioning, this person is trying to evaluate content that they're creating for their audience, and trying to figure out, should we focus on video content? Should we focus on text-based content? How long should the videos be? Which are all things you can answer with data, and that's true data-informed decision making. But it's knowing where is his head in 6 months, 12 months, or what is he going to try to be answering with this? Is getting to the root of it.
All right, y'all. This has been such a great 3-parter so far. I've got one last question for you. But with such a focus on measurement of impact, per usual, with a new strategy, there can be both sort of misguided approaches to said strategy, but also external factors that can pose challenges to really achieving impact measurement holistically. So I'm curious what y'all see those being through the end of 2021 and into Q1 2022, or really just, if you want to peer into the crystal ball at a higher level, right, over the next couple of years, what are some of those challenges or risks to impact measurement specifically for product strategy in the near future? And what are some of your tips for maneuvering those, whether you're a product developer yourself or you're an end user looking to bring a product developer on board?
Privacy is coming down in a big way. Data regulation is coming in a big way, whether it's federally mandated or it happens at the state level or it happens at a consumer expectation level. Those are all things coming our way. A lot of our measurement approaches right now are rooted in practices and instrumentation that has been established in a that environment. So the task for the future analysts and strategists is going to be finding ways to get those data-informed pieces in ways that don't breach your customers' trust. So that could be more direct interaction with customers, less fully aggregated data or more anonymized data, and finding ways to take this stuff and make it useful. And the companies that are able to do that are going to be the ones that I think are on the best terms with their customers for the next year.
Yeah, I think a lot of that privacy regulation is going to hit marketing harder than a lot of the types of data that we look at. And we care about marketing data too, but that's really where you get into who is the user and what are their demographics, and they're targeting ads based on who you are. Whereas our realm of data is more on the product analytics and just what are people doing. We don't really care how old you are, what your gender is, but we just want to know what things you're interacting with. And so when Mason says anonymize, luckily that's kind of fine for us on behavioral metrics or product metrics. But it is something to keep in mind as we move forward, and we have to be careful about making sure that there's not even identifiers that can join our data back to something that is personally identifiable. So you have to be careful, and you have to really know what you're doing with the way that the tracking is implemented. And if it does involve personal information, giving the user the opportunity to opt out of that, or at least understand it.
To put it this way, we don't care who you are, where you're from, or what you did, as long as you use our products meaningfully.
Living the dream. I love it, y'all. Hey, I think that does it. I think that wraps it up for this 3-parter. I appreciate all of you for giving us your time, pulling from your expertise, and really letting our audience get a better sense for how Shockoe approaches product strategy and what we can learn from that to better assess why product strategy is changing in many ways today, and what is helping it win out when done correctly. So thank you again to our 3 guests. We've been speaking with the talented product strategy team here at Shockoe: Chandler, Tyler, Mason Brown, and Toz Grewal. We'll go down the line here real quick. If folks want to get in touch with each of you, or maybe just with the entire team, how can they do so? Where can they find more resources or touch points?
Shockoe.com. It's the best way. Our contact stuff is all there.
Yeah, and a lot of our content is linking out to other resources as well. We're constantly plugged into the goings on of the world of product management and strategy, and so we'll share things that we find interesting and relevant.
Fantastic. All right, team. Thank you again, Chandler, Mason, Toz. It's really been a pleasure doing this 3-parter with y'all, and I'm looking forward to continuing these conversations in the future, hopefully. I have a feeling product strategy is going to continue to face some new trends, some new metrics that are going to push it forward, and y'all are going to be part of that conversation. So I appreciate it. Thanks again, and we'll chat again soon. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this 3-part episode of Haptic Feedback, a Shockoe podcast. It's really been a pleasure sourcing the product strategy team for this conversation. And I hope you all learned something fresh and new from this discussion about how to approach your own product strategies and your partnerships with product strategy teams. So as we wrap this up, make sure you're heading to our website, shockoe.com. Again, Shockoe, SHOCKOE.com. And make sure you're heading to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Hit that subscribe button on Haptic Feedback for previous conversations and more multi-part conversations with the Shockoe team and other industry leaders. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Shockoe's podcast, Haptic Feedback.